This is the One Point podcast, and I'm Rohit Yadav. Last year, September, we published a unique report called Diverse by Default, in which we explored the what, the why, and the how of the topic. We all recognize the what, lower funding for diverse founders, and the many challenges they face. We also understand the why. Diverse teams drive better decisions, foster greater innovation, and deliver superior business outcomes. However, the real challenge lies in addressing the how. In last year's report, we surveyed and interviewed approximately 40 ecosystem stakeholders, including investors, founders, and operators, to uncover practical approaches, actionable methods, and effective frameworks to tackle these issues head on. Now, 1 year later, I'm trying to capture success stories from our VC industry itself, and one of which is female founder office hours run by Playfair Capital. To discuss this, we have the lead for this initiative, Clare Zhang, with us today. So before we start, let me introduce Clare to you all. Clare is an investor at Playfair Capital. It's a journalist fund based out of London and investing in high conviction at pre-seed. Previous to venture, Clare was founder's associate at Liveflow, a seed-funded fintech automating financial workflows for accountants, and part of the driver ops team at Uber, where she focused on driver engagement and acquisition. So, Claire, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining in. We'll be
Thanks
talking
for
a
having me.
lot about the initiative at Playfair that you're leading. So, thanks for joining in.
Thanks for having me.
And so, let me ask this first question. You recently concluded the 12th version of Female Founder Office Hours. Tell us how it went and give us some numbers around that.
It went incredibly, actually. We had the biggest initiative we've ever seen. So we
Wow.
had about 310 founders joining us, about 210 investors, totaling over 1,200 meetings over the course of 3 hours, which was absolutely incredible.
It's
And
incredible.
we absolutely incredible, exactly. And we had a record number of founders applying as well, almost 600. And unfortunately, couldn't accept them all just because not all of them were a thesis fit for the event itself.
Okay.
But kind of a great tailwind just to show how much more important this problem and issue is becoming in the industry and how many people want to tackle it.
Wow, amazing to hear the numbers. Really, it's one of the biggest of its kind, right?
Yes, we haven't heard of anything bigger, so we're calling it the
Yeah,
biggest until we do.
amazing success story. So tell me, like, what was the motivation when this whole thing started behind starting this topic around female founders, and why did Playfair choose this specific topic of office hours?
It's a great question. So we actually started Female Founder Office Hours back in 2019, mostly because our team back then saw that there's just such a struggle for women in the industry. There's a lack of access to funding, and especially actually if you're outside of certain geos, you're not going to be able to have the relationships that a lot of other counterparts you would have to investors in different ecosystems. So we really wanted to do something, make an impact there. And what we were thinking about is how can we as investors, as a fund, contribute the best to this problem, considering there's tons of other initiatives we could have done. There's tons of other initiatives being done. Where can we add the most value? And actually what we found is that comes through the fact that we have direct access to this network of investors. We actually have the firsthand relationships with people that founders are trying to get in contact with. And that's actually why we decided office hours is probably the best setup. What we can do is just bring in our network and try to facilitate those relationships to the best of our ability. And obviously we started with female founders, women founders, particularly because that was just something that we felt really in touch with firsthand. I think we had seen so many women who had struggled to raise. We have a few female founders in our portfolio who actually had talked about the difficulties that they had and, some of the difficulties that their counterparts have had. So it was kind of the first one. And obviously there's so many other diversity problems, but it was just the one that we felt touched our heart the closest.
Okay. And how did you come to focus on this office hours as a initiative, and why not, do it in a different way? For example, like build a sleeve of investment and focus your money specifically for diverse founders or female founders, or run
Yeah.
kind of an accelerator or an incubator kind of thing. So, there are different initiatives that Playfair could have done. but you focus on office hours. And why was that?
Yeah, so I think what we were looking for was biggest impact possible. And obviously, there's the accelerator route, or even having dedicated funds to women founders could have been a good way to go, but we felt like the impact was actually too small. We actually, even in our second fund, already had 30% of our portfolio having a female founder within the founding team. And we felt like, actually just saying we want to dedicate part of our fund wasn't enough, and we wanted the whole industry to participate. And obviously, the best way to do that is actually getting investors directly in front of the founders themselves who don't have the access.
Okay.
And this was our way of saying, we can get every single fund that we have relationships with involved, get them direct access to some of the top talent and founders out there.
Okay. And so how did you go about um, reaching out to other investors like a few years back and saying, hey, you know what, we have this initiative in mind. Would you like to participate? So, there could have been many questions, like some of would have participated, some of them would not have. So how easy was it to kind of engage and take this collaborative approach towards this topic?
Yeah, that's a great question. Surprisingly, it's actually not that difficult. I think
Okay.
most investors, we kind of think like investors, right? So being able to say, we want to bring you direct deal flow from really good talent. It's just the caveat that they are female founders, but that's no different than what you would normally be doing on another office hours, is a
Okay.
really, really strong tool for them. But an added layer on top is this is a topic that actually we found investors really want to support in. And every edition, we managed to get so many people. And I think a lot of this helps that our investment team actually directly outreach to the investors for every edition. We all kind of reach out to the people we own relationships with, networks with, and
Hmm.
that really increases the conversion. They trust us as we're their friends, their network, their somewhat colleagues, and they really want to be able to support us in our initiative, but also know that we are bringing them something really strong and valuable. So it's actually not that hard of a sell, surprisingly.
Okay. And so all those investors might have or might be part of other initiatives in some way or the other. So what I assume is for them, it's totally fine to participate in Playfair's initiative of office hours and then be part of other initiatives as well. So this should be
Absolutely.
perfectly fine. It's not a kind of a competitive world out there with respect to initiatives, right? Like more
Not
is
at all.
better in this case.
Exactly. And we actually say this is just one of the initiatives you should be participating in.
Okay.
There's a million others that we encourage them all to participate. And the great thing is we've actually built up quite a community around the initiative. So there's a lot of other things, accelerators that come up, different programs that we always get reached out to by, and we try to circulate as much as possible, get our community involved as much as possible, so that all the other initiatives get as much support as they can as well.
Okay. Sounds good. All of this would take a lot of your energy. I mean, the whole team's energy, right? So I would assume there must be a process behind it. Process of, let's say, right from the beginning, from filtering. You mentioned you don't accept all the female founders who come to your initiative, right? So walk us through how you go about this whole process, how much time or capacity of yours it takes, and what's the kind of internal KPIs that you look at for success of this initiative?
It's a great question. Definitely takes a lot of time. We don't have an operations team. It's just the investment
Mhm.
team who works on this. The last edition, we actually had four of us working full time on it for about 2 months. Each of
Wow.
us dedicated probably about half of a workday a week to the initiative. And this is something that's actually part of what we say is our investment or investor role is facilitating events and supporting founders. And this is one of the ways that we do it. So this kind of directly
Okay.
goes into some of our internal KPIs in that way. But it is logistically difficult. We do a lot of partnering. We always bring in sponsors that we think will provide value to the founders. So the last edition, we had Carta, who does a lot around cap tables and basically wanted to be able to facilitate some early stage founders to get more clean
Okay.
cap tables or just understand how to set those up. And we also brought in Microsoft for Startups, who obviously have lots of programs and support with a lot of cloud credits as well, which is really great. And we use their networks. We use all of our investor networks. We basically share the initiative everywhere. And we, during our application period, tried to get as much reach as we can to invest to the founders all over Europe. And the investment the criteria to participate is actually purely just being pre-Series A, based in Europe, with at least a female founder on the team, building in tech. And this is predominantly just because that's where we found that our networks are, and we wanted to be able to facilitate the best matches possible, not waste any investor time or any founder time with matches that are, growth stage funds looking at a pre-seed company. It doesn't really work.
Yeah.
It's just not a fit. And also the mentoring aspect doesn't work as well because the advice they can provide is not really relevant. So we basically said, let's just optimize, and anyone who falls into that category, that ICP, they'll be accepted, no questions asked, and be guaranteed meetings with 4 investors. And then to organize all the logistics in the back end, we actually use a company called Grip. They do a lot of matchmaking events, and you can host all your video conferences in there, everything, do your
Okay.
scheduling, do your networking. They've been a really great partner with us for the last, I think, 7 editions now.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
And so this has expanded tremendously, right? The number of applications, as you said, from coming from founders has also increased. How has the reaction from founders has been? What do they get out of this, right? That's also one of the questions from their side.
100%. The reaction is always really incredible. I think we have every once in a while investors who have last minute cancellations and have, scheduling conflicts that come up. And we always have to adjust for that, which is always really difficult, but it's a very small percentage of the total meetings that occur. And the
Okay.
rest of the meetings, it's actually really great just because I think we try to pitch it as a mentoring event. Obviously, we want the calls to lead to next calls, to some sort of process, hopefully to a term sheet would be actually the ideal scenario. Obviously doesn't always happen, but we think it's even more valuable that these founders can just directly ask investors questions. How should I run my process? What funds do you recommend for what I'm building? How much should I even be raising? All things that investors can directly answer with their mindsets. And we find that founders think this is incredibly valuable. It's kind of direct access to a Q&A session that might be a bit cloudy, unclear. It's very not transparent in our industry. So being able to have that direct feedback is incredible. And I think it's actually incredible to see the outputs as well, because we do have, on average, every edition, at least from what we hear, about one investment being made from all the meetings. One investor who directly met the founder at the event said, "This is incredible. It's a perfect fit for us. I really, really like the founder. Let's continue," and leads to an investment, which is really exciting.
Okay. So what you mentioned is that for 4 meetings are kind of guaranteed, right? So that's kind of the
Yes,
target that you want to aim for. And within those
exactly.
4 meetings, at least one of the investor has a very positive view on the fit, on the founders, and kind of takes it forward. Whether it eventually leads to an investment in the startup is kind of another question, obviously.
Yeah.
But am I correct in mentioning this?
Yes, definitely. Our goal is actually to have one investor meeting per founder lead to the next action output, whether that's connecting them to someone else in
Okay.
their network, taking them to our next call, etc.
Okay. So this goes into the initial question that I asked, what do they get out of it? So how should they approach these meetings, these office hours, these, fast-paced meetings with investors? Is there something specific they should have in mind? Is
I
there
think it,
something very like they should be at a specific stage of fundraising that they should be coming and attending this office hours? And if you were a founder, how would you approach these meetings? How would you come up and take your questions and ask those questions to the investors? I know it's a loaded question, so take your time.
it's a great question, and it's a bit of a political answer. It entirely depends on what stage you're at. But we didn't
Okay.
want to limit the event just to founders who are raising, because we think
Hmm.
there's so much more value that you can get pre-raise actually by speaking to investors.
Hmm.
So I think if you're going into a fundraise, gearing up, I think it's absolutely the best time to ask the questions, get clarity around how to structure your raise exactly, whatever nuances, little questions you might have there, so that you
Hmm.
can hit the ground running once it does happen, and already have basically your first intro, your first call ready. Because everyone knows with the fundraising process, it is a bit of a snowball effect. Once you
Yep.
get going, once you get embedded, it opens up doors everywhere. So just getting yourself ready for that process to begin and asking the right questions from the investors or any questions you might have is perfect. And for founders who are in the middle of their raise, I think it's the perfect opportunity to pitch, have just an automatic open door, build kind of the perfect pitch, elevator pitch of 1 minute, what you're building, and then just allow the investor to ask questions. Because I think that actually helps you to tailor your pitch better for other investors and also just to learn what they care about, which is really helpful when you actually build up, for instance, an FAQ section in a data room. So I think that's absolutely how any founder should be approaching it. And I recommend founders apply to every edition, actually, just because it helps you to build up your network. You get automatically four investor relationships off of the back of each one. And it never hurts to know more investors. Doesn't matter what stage you're at. Doesn't matter if you're not even going to fundraise for a year. That's another door that opens that you might not have another opportunity to. So I think if I were a founder, that's how I'd approach it. Just go to every single session and just honestly hound the investors with questions. They can handle it.
Okay. And if you were a founder, you would have some specific kind of success parameter in your head. For example, hey, I want to go to this office hours. I want to have four meetings, and what I should get out of this is, let's say I'm not fundraising, but I just want feedback on my deck, for example, or I want feedback
Yes.
on the way I approach my pitch, for example. So is there something very specific that they should have in mind or prepare in a way, and then go to these meetings and then say it upfront to the investor, hey, you know what, this is what I'm here for, and let me do this spiel, let's say.
Absolutely. It depends on what stage that the founders are at. If they're in the middle of their fundraise, I encourage their KPI to be some sort of progression meeting post fact. It doesn't necessarily have to be with one of the investors they directly spoke with, but even, a referral, the investor refers them to another investor that converts to a meeting. That's already a really good success metric. But for the ones who are pre-fundraise, I think just coming in and saying to the investors, this is exactly what I'm looking for out of this meeting, and gearing it in that direction. We always tell all the investors the initiative, the event is entirely founder led, and tell them to be ready to support the founders with whatever they ask for. So
Okay.
they actually come in completely ready to listen to the founders and basically support however they can.
Awesome. Now, we talked a lot about the good stuff, right? Where are the challenges for you specifically? Let me ask this first. For you, for your team, for Playfair, where have the biggest challenges been?
Related to the initiative?
Yes, running this initiative.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the biggest challenge we always see is kind of a disconnect between investors and founders. I think
Mhm.
in our head, this is a really important event, and we speak directly to, we're emailing back and forth, quite often already spoken to a lot of the founders who attend the event. So we know how crucial this is for them. And as I mentioned before, we do have every edition investors who cancel, reschedule, have to drop out. And I think this directly actually impacts the experience that the founders have, not just with the initiative, but with
Okay.
raising funds at all. We think it
Okay.
really kind of tampers their view of investors. And unfortunately, even though we want to be the bridge between, we think a lot of it has to do with attitudes. And that's something that we struggle with a lot in terms of trying to
Okay.
pull the event forward, making it bigger after every initiative, and being able to support even more founders. Obviously, there's always going to be roadblockers. So that's probably the thing that we struggle with the most.
Okay. And how do you plan to kind of solve it in future? Like, is there a remedy that's already in your mind?
Yeah, we've done a lot of different things, from uninviting investors who have
Okay.
canceled last minute, uninviting funds, and we've already let the investors know that if they cancel last minute, they will need to make it up, and we will automatically introduce the founder to them and
Okay.
expect them, chase them to set up a meeting outside of the initiative. And additionally, for any founders who do get investors who cancel on them on the day of, we guarantee them a meeting with an investor from our team, just because we think that they deserve access. And we might
Sure.
not be the best fit, but considering we've seen every angle of the investing process and we've dealt with so many of these founders before, we know exactly what their issues are. We think we can provide quite a unique perspective as well.
That's fair. Good to hear. Let's maybe switch gears for this last couple of questions. So we talked a lot about the initiative from Playfair, right? If we zoom out and look at founders, what do you see are the biggest significant challenges apart from just fundraising? I mean, fundraising is challenging for everybody, and specifically in the last one or 2 years, right? It has been challenging whether you're diverse or not. Like, it has been challenging. So, what are the significant challenges that diverse founders face? If you know of specific founder stories, feel free to kind of highlight those as well.
Yeah, I think it's growing and growing in challenges for not just diverse founders, any founders now. The markets are becoming incredibly saturated. Capital is not as free flowing as it has been, 5 years back. So it's a harder time to raise than ever before, which automatically for diverse founders puts them at an even bigger disadvantage, to be honest. But I think what we've seen from running the initiative so many times is actually just the spaces that diverse founders tend to build in are unfortunately not spaces that we find investors care about particularly. I think there is
Okay.
a little bit of trying to build in what you know and investors investing in what they know, the areas that they think are important. And those don't often align just because you do still have quite a bit disconnect in terms of diverse investment teams as well. And
Okay.
I think that automatically trickles down from the top all the way to what's being invested in and what things people care about. So I think that's always really difficult. And obviously, as capital becomes more constrained and investors have more pressure, they also take fewer risks. And I think that's automatically going to be the biggest thing that will challenge any founders who want to build something extremely, truly innovative. Yeah, probably the biggest thing.
Okay. So the area where they're building is kind of not coinciding with the areas where a lot of those investors want to invest in. So this is a challenge. Let's take a step back. Do you think awareness of the founders, many of the diverse founders are first time founders, and the awareness level on how to build a startup, how to fundraise, how to do 10 other things might be, let's say, on a lower level. And obviously, office hours is one such initiative. But as I say, it's very much geared towards fundraising. That you can talk about Dex and XYZ as well, but still, it's much more geared towards fundraising. So overall, do you think from an awareness perspective, there could be awareness as a challenge first? And if yes, if there's something that could be done around it?
Absolutely. I do think that part of the disadvantage for diverse founders is the fact that they don't have the access to the knowledge and the information that their counterparts might have. And
Mhm.
that automatically means that they, first time founding, come in, don't really realize that, for instance, a lot of investors don't like any consumer facing products. And this is an area that I think a lot of people really want to build in. And it takes that knowledge to actually know that that's not the best business model for venture investors. But there are some really incredible initiatives actually around this, such as Women Who Build. It's a new one where they're trying to encourage students from even high school, college level to start building certain things, pursuing science, building in areas that they know that investors want to invest in, encouraging people who wouldn't have had access to that knowledge before by accepting them into this program and kind of facilitating them through the process of discovery and helping
Okay.
them to understand what they should be building and looking for.
Awesome. Nice to hear. I mean, in the end, I always ask this one question, right? So if you have one interesting, inspirational idea that you might have read or heard recently, and it may not be from the startup world, it could be from anywhere, that you would like to share with the audience, please do.
Well, actually, I think the thing that's always top of mind for me, it's not super unique, and I think it's a stat that everyone knows, and I think you might have even published it in your book somewhere, but from last year's findings, the State of European Tech saw that diverse teams, women-led teams, actually had 3x valuations at exits,
Mhm.
which I think is absolutely incredible and just says so much about what diverse teams are capable of, why we should be doing these initiatives, but also
Mhm.
kind of proves a lot of people wrong in terms of saying building in certain spaces might not be the most lucrative because obviously those women are building what they want to build. And I find that absolutely incredible and really inspiring and should be a stat
Yeah.
that everybody should be headlining, chasing towards.
Thanks for mentioning this as the last point, Claire. Thank you so much for joining in for this short podcast recording. I mean, the focus was really on this Female Founders Office, our initiative from Playfair, and how you're running it, how successful it is, and the success story itself. I mean, it's unique. And thanks for bringing this all out to the audience. Thank you so much. Fingers crossed for the next version, right? Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Rohit.